Hi everyone, this is John Howell from AviaDev. This is part 2 of the October connectivity update. So if you were looking for part 1, that is also here in the YouTube playlist or the podcast episodes. So do listen to that first unless you're particularly interested in the topics in part 2. In this episode, we are going to start with a very deep dive into the New York to Africa market. Lots of numbers, lots of analysis in there. Some analysis on what Turkish Airlines fleet order, the new order that they have put in, could mean for Africa, new aircraft arrivals for TAAG and Malawi Airlines, and also United Nigeria's deal to take on some ex-Southwest 737s and put those into their fleet. Enjoy this episode, and if you haven't yet, head over and watch the first episode. So now something that Behramjee's wanted to discuss for a couple of months and has been raring to go. He's been sitting on the edge of his seat, and that is a deep dive on the New York Africa market with ET and KQ comparisons. Behramjee, you've been waiting for this. Is your moment. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I have 2 pages worth of notes to discuss, all with very interesting and revealing information. So I hope everyone enjoys it, and there should be some good back and forth comments between Sean and I on this. So the New York to Africa market segment, it's the biggest market segment in terms of demand from North America to Africa for obvious reasons. It's also arguably the biggest market from North America to majority of cities in Asia and the Middle East, etc. Obviously not to South America, because I would assume now Miami takes that title. But the good thing is, New York to Africa, the market is growing year over year consistently and steadily. The biggest market from New York, by the way, when we talk about New York in this podcast today, we're looking at Newark plus JFK combined. So just to point that out. The biggest African market, when Africa, entire continent, including Northern Africa, is Cairo. Cairo is 229,000 passengers point to point from JFK and Newark last year. The number 2 market from New York to Africa. John, would you like to take a guess?
So what did you say? Number 1 was Cairo?
Yes.
Yeah.
The second
It's also not sub-Saharan. It's not sub-Saharan, so take the guess.
It's not sub-Saharan. Oh, right. Okay. Because I was going to go Nairobi.
No, it is sub-Saharan, John. Sean?
Oh. West side?
What do you have? I have Casablanca slightly ahead of what I think you're looking at.
No, because Casablanca does not have the Newark demand. Accra, you have to look at Newark plus JFK.
Oh, okay.
I've got Casablanca slightly ahead on that, 133 to 131. But okay, Casablanca and Accra effectively are in 2 and 3.
And we like Accra being sub-Saharan. Let's go with that one.
For Casablanca, I have from both the New York's airports 118,000, and for Accra I have 132,000. So that
I have
is
131 for Accra and 133 for Casa, including all New York area airports, LaGuardia, JFK, Newark, etc. But as I said, we're talking about less than a couple of percentage points over here, so it's not a big number in that respect. Casa and Accra are effectively 2 and 3 from the New York area.
Okay. So, John, would you have guessed that? Accra being bigger than Lagos?
That is really surprising, I have to say. It is surprising, but why? That would be my next question, because it's not like there isn't the links between the two.
There are more Nigerians than Ghanaians in New York City, but I assume also the benefit that Accra has is tourism from New York and its adjoining areas, which can help with the demand being there. Plus also much easier getting a visa into Ghana than it is into Nigeria from the US.
It's been hugely successful, the whole year of return and all that sort of marketing campaign that they had for Ghana. And that was something very consolidated and purpose-driven, aimed at the US market, whereas obviously Nigeria is just done what it does and relies on the demand that exists. I think. I don't think it's anything
What I've
strategic.
seen is that
Nigeria does not have a coherent tourism strategy. I'll be perfectly blunt and say
it has no
Nigeria's
tourism
tourism
strategy.
strategy is give me a bribe and give me a visa kind of thing rather than you
Yeah,
are welcome and coming over there. And certainly Ghana's had its own issues with visas, but yeah, Ghana at least has a plan which Nigeria also lacks.
yeah. But also, what I feel has helped Ghana a lot, which I've noticed with the passenger trend since 2008, is Obama's visit in 2008. Ever since Obama's visit in 2008, the interest for Ghana from America has exploded.
And his
That's one
family
thing.
linkage, though, is
Definitely. You know,
Kenya, right? That's right.
Obama's itinerary in Ghana was focused on African American heritage, and that brought the spotlight in terms of the potential that African Americans have to the entire return. So I think a lot of it, you're absolutely right. That was the spark that, that others then picked up and ran with to build on, to offer marketing campaigns, to offer tour campaigns, and just create that awareness that African Americans have a heritage in West Africa, and Ghana in particular is best poised as a starter heritage rediscovery area for that. And I think, once again, if you look in terms of where urban African Americans are, not just first generation, but also in terms of historical settlements, there are two real catchment areas. And one is the New York metro area, which New York, Connecticut, that New Jersey kind of area. And then there's the DC metro area, which DC, Virginia, Maryland, and so forth. And when you look at those two catchment areas, I'd say that especially for West Africa, the diasporan demand is going to be driven by those two metro areas in particular. And then after that, you'll see Texas, you'll see Georgia, you'll see the Midwest and things like that. The Horn of Africa, for example, has a big concentration in the Midwest, in Minneapolis and that area. And these are little pockets over there. But if you look in terms of the West African and generally sub-Saharan African, New York and DC are the two catchment areas that really drive that demand, both from the US end as well as for the VFR, first generation diasporan traffic, and where the immigrants tend to go to.
And United Nations.
The United Nations not as much for West Africa. The United Nations is definitely driving. If you look at it, Nairobi is number 5 on the list, if I'm not mistaken.
That was my thinking.
When you're
That's
looking
why I suggested that.
Yeah, when you're looking at Nairobi, I think Nairobi is hugely driven by the United Nations. New York to Nairobi, and Geneva to Nairobi, and New York to Geneva, and things like that. These are very UN-driven routes, but it's not as much for West Africa. I think for West Africa, A, it's business, B, it's diasporan, and C, it is tourism-driven, especially in the case of Accra over Lagos.
And that means that the Kenya market is under threat a little bit based on what's happening politically with the UN and the links with the US and all the rest of it. That market maybe is not as robust as it once was, depending on what happens there, whereas West Africa may be more so. We'll watch that with interest.
Yes, but also another thing which might affect demand this year is the drop of US aid, because that has been suspended by the Trump administration. So that traffic from Washington and New York would also fall. But anyways, getting back to the top markets. So Cairo was number 1, 229,000. Accra and Casablanca, let's say, tied at number 2 at 130,000 approximately. Lagos 3 at 117. Johannesburg number 4 at 85,000. Nairobi 72,000. Cape Town 54,000. Cape Town mainly because of the incremental capacity that was put in there last year by United and Delta. Then Dakar, Senegal 47,000. Abidjan got a big lift last year because of Ethiopian starting a new non-stop flights, 34,000 for Abidjan. Monrovia was the biggest market in terms of incremental growth year over year from a percentage point of view. 27,000 passengers from Monrovia to New York. That represented an 81% growth year over year. So those were the top 10 markets for New York. Growth-wise, Monrovia number 1, 81%. Number 2 was Algiers, 30%. Followed by Abidjan, 23%. Abidjan because of the Ethiopian non-stop service. Cape Town, 22%. And then Lagos with 20%. But keep in mind, Lagos pre-COVID was bigger than Accra. Post-COVID, it has gone down quite a bit, whereas Accra has taken the opposite way forward.
Again,
Now, in
that's
terms of
testament to the work that maybe the destination's done to
yes,
put itself in
yes,
the mind's eye of, and there's so much heritage and history. But yeah, great.
Definitely. And remember, the Nigeria, as you say, the visa situation in Nigeria had been largely dysfunctional for the entire post-COVID time. Nigeria was not issuing tourist visas at all. To get into Nigeria, you had to get a business visa from a tour operator and everything. You simply could not apply for a number of years for a tourist visa because Nigeria was closed for COVID until 2023 almost. And Nigerian visas are horrendously expensive. As an American trying to get a Nigerian visa, you'll pay $400, give or take.
yeah,
And Ghana is not cheap. You're paying $100, give or take. And that's a huge difference when you're a family trying to make a tourist trip. And it does not affect the diaspora because Nigeria allows anyone born in Nigeria effectively to travel to there for free, even if they're traveling on a foreign passport. So it doesn't affect the donors. It doesn't affect that. It actually affects the tourists who are coming to spend money at the expense of their own diaspora. So Nigerian visa policy, as I said, it's something that when I was in Nigeria a few weeks ago, I had a long chat with some of the stakeholders there, and some of this information, considering that these are people who implement these policies, was news to them. And they're like, oh, it's not so expensive, is it? Yes, it is. Oh, but they told us it. But no. And it's, as I say, this is where you just lack the understanding of what the policy is. And Ghana has taken the opposite tack. Ghana has simplified the visa process. It still hasn't gone e-visa though, which Nigeria has. Nigeria is now 100% e-visa system, and to my absolute shock, it works really well, where it's actually linked to your online landing card submission. You get a QR code which you scan, and it works really smoothly, which shocked me how well that worked. But it still costs $400. Ghana is still a bit of a paper sticker here and everything after you submit your thing. So I think that has made a big difference in why Ghana has not just bounced back, but bounced back and more than exceeded pre-COVID share for sure, and I think even in absolute numbers it has grown. We've seen United enter that Ghana market to largely replace South African Airways' capacity from Washington, but Delta has continued to upgrade their US to Ghana flights with JFK as well as additional seasonal flights from Atlanta. So I think this is definitely, it's nothing that is really surprising there. The mention in terms of what the USA did and for Nairobi, I don't see that really affecting Nairobi as much as it's going to affect the traffic, the distribution traffic from Nairobi within East Africa, so places like Somalia, South Sudan, and so forth. And we've seen a lot of the smaller operators in Kenya already having to reinvent themselves. We've seen guys like ALS, Renegade, and stuff, and these guys who previously were very dependent on this charter traffic, which was funded for the most part by the US government directly or indirectly, having to now pivot towards ACMIs and scheduled service and so forth to basically cover the overheads that they had committed into long-term investments that were being backed by that. So I don't think the long-haul route into Nairobi is going to be struggling as much as it is going to be the regional routes from Nairobi that were distributed on these charters and these dedicated service, the operators that are really going to see the brunt of that US policy shift.
Yeah. Fair enough. All right, Behramjee.
Yes.
And also, one other point on this, I expect to actually see Cape Town make a significant shift in 2025. Now, I haven't seen the actual preliminary numbers for this, but we have seen that in the post-COVID environment, Cape Town in particular is consistently drawing more and more market share away from Johannesburg. And we've seen it most recently now with Delta, who are going to be switching from 3 weekly Cape Town flights and daily Johannesburg instead to 5 and 5. And again, that is more deployment of capacity into Cape Town. That's not necessarily exclusive to the JFK market or so forth, but I think the US to Cape Town market has been one of the big success stories for South Africa and for Cape Town and Cape Town Air Access itself. We just celebrated its 10-year anniversary. Happy birthday, Cape Town Air Access. But yeah, I think it's been I would not be surprised to see Cape Town close that gap on Johannesburg slightly. I think they were, Cape Town was about 55, 56, and Johannesburg was about 80 something.
85,
And I
80.
think we'd probably see that probably about 65, 75 split. So a much narrower Cape Town, Johannesburg thing, as more and more American tourists in particular are using Cape Town as their gateway to a Southern African thing, where they're starting with Cape Town and then going directly from Cape Town to Vic Falls, to Namibia, to the winelands, to wherever, rather than going into Johannesburg and using Johannesburg as their start-off point. And again, why this has happened, we've had this discussion before. I've had this discussion on Addison's podcast before as well. The lack of a hub carrier in Johannesburg, which SAA had control, has allowed the demand not necessarily to go away from Johannesburg, but to find its natural target area anyway. Johannesburg remains the largest gateway to South Africa by far. And I know we're getting completely off this track, but, and I've mentioned this, but it bears repeating. When you look at arrivals from Europe and from North America, Western Cape tends to be those destinations. When you look at arrivals from Asia, when you look at arrivals from Africa itself, when you look at arrivals from the rest of the world, the traffic tends to be going to Gauteng and KZN. And I think that really does say where the growth in South Africa is going as Cape Town continues to grow, how much of that is tourism, and what people are coming to South Africa for. In statistics, South Africa, despite all its fault, once you're able to figure out their website and their archives, has data, raw data that is superb. You just have to find it and make sense of it, and it's really good on stories like this. Kudos to Statistics South Africa. I have spent many a happy hour digging through spreadsheets and Excel charts and fun stuff like that.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for
Behramjee.
that.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, it's interesting and ironic that Sean mentioned Cape Town quite a bit just now, because in terms of yield on the New York, Africa routes last year, Cape Town was number one. Cape Town was the highest yielding route from New York to Africa. And that's probably because not only are economy class fares high, but also a lot of people flying business class, those especially who are retired as well as corporate executives, but mostly I would say retired folks going to Cape Town and splurging that extra cash on the J-class cabin and premium economy cabin of Delta and United.
Yes.
Number 2 highest yielding route was Johannesburg. Number 3 was which I thought would have been number 1 was Abuja. And number 4 was Casablanca. I thought Abuja would be number 1 or 2 because of the higher amount of premium traffic on that route, but surprisingly it was number 2.
Now, I'll tell you where the Abuja market is changing, and this is a fascinating thing that I've been having this discussion with my clients in Nigeria as well recently, is that Abuja is no longer just a government town. We've actually seen that Abuja is drawing more domestic traffic, and especially more domestic connection traffic in Nigeria than Lagos is.
Of course.
And as a result, Abuja has become a gateway for much of Nigeria, where Lagos is a dysfunctional airport that struggles to even deal with its O&D. Lagos, domestic to international connections are not practical. That makes Abuja the airport of choice for people from the rest of Nigeria who are using it. So as a result, if you're coming from Enugu, you're coming from Kaduna, if you're coming from anywhere other than Lagos, it makes more sense to connect in Abuja than it does to connect in Lagos. And consequently, because most Nigerian airlines, not most, all Nigerian airlines do not have any interline connections with the international carriers who for the most part are serving the US to Nigeria market out of Abuja or Lagos, Abuja winds up having its yield. Abuja O&D itself, that is organic O&D from the Abuja area, yes, includes a lot of governmental traffic, which is higher yield, but that number is being diluted by people on separate tickets who are flying into Abuja on Airpeace or Max Air or ExeJet or whoever else, and then taking a long-haul flight on the international carrier onwards to the United States. And that's what dilutes it to a more price-sensitive thing. Because if you look at Ethiopian out of Abuja, they're flying these 777s or A350s pretty much every day, and adding in additional, in fact, going up to 12 weekly flights on Abuja and so forth. That is not high yield traffic. Ethiopian is a mass shipment product. And for them, it's not about the yields, it's about the volumes. And in fact, I'm sure a big chunk of that Abuja to US traffic is actually backtracking via Addis in some way as well. But anyway, as I said, it's just an interesting thing.
Yes, definitely. The main reason is the inconvenience of the Lagos domestic to international airport transfer. Because that myself, I've experienced that a few times. It's horrendous, absolutely horrendous. So now, getting now to the more interesting part, which is comparing Ethiopian and Kenya Airways' performance on their New York flights last year. So quite a bit of interesting information on that. When it comes to Kenya Airways, they transported last year on their JFK service 79,933 passengers as per the data available. This equates to a 67% load factor if it was operating 5 times a week year round. But I believe last year during a couple of months of the year they flew a daily service just as an incremental. But if I just take it as 5 times a week flat out, it works out to be 67% load factor. Out of which,
Behramjee, let me
yeah,
just make this comment. I'm not entirely sure that the figures that we're working from, and I've got the same data set as you do, I think, on this, the OAL share one from IATA DDS. I'm not entirely sure that captures the Delta code share traffic accurately.
no, I just did the KQ. I didn't do the Delta. Yes, so obviously I'll just do
Exactly.
the
So the
one
Delta
ticketed
code
on
traffic
KQ.
on the KQ flight may not be included in that
Mm,
67% number. So that number may be higher when you add the Delta
yes,
coded traffic O&D.
yes, because I'm only looking at KQ ticketed packs. So
Exactly.
yes,
And we know that from what Martin has told us that the Delta
yeah,
code share has moved that needle. But the Delta numbers will include not just the O&D on the direct KQ flight, but also the traffic going over Paris and Amsterdam. So as I said, it's going to be hard to separate just to get that exact thing in terms of load factors.
okay. So just then to clarify, we're using for KQ the KQ ticketed passenger number. So thanks for that point. So out of that amount, 48% was point to point. And this number, keep in mind, will be very important few minutes down the road. I'll explain why. So 48%, nearly half of KQ's ticketed passengers on the JFK flight were point to point and 52% were transit. Their top 10 transit markets feeding their JFK flight were Johannesburg, which was their number one market. Number two was Zanzibar. Surprisingly, I would have expected a more VFR focused market to be their number two, but it wasn't. Number three was Kilimanjaro. So it's obviously safari focused over there. And then number four, then Kigali, Lagos, Dar es Salaam, and Cape Town, each respectively. So I'm not surprised with Johannesburg being their number one market for feeder, but I'm surprised that Zanzibar and Kilimanjaro were their number two and number three. Now, in comparison, Ethiopian Airlines, they fly from both Newark and JFK airports. With a much bigger aircraft, KQ uses a 787-8, a 230-seater. ET uses a mix of
Which is
787-8.
KQ's biggest aircraft, we should add.
Yes. ET uses a mix of 787-8s, which is a 270-seater for them, as well as 787-9s. And they fly to both Newark and JFK Airport. ET's numbers, also one thing about to mention that KQ's JFK ticketed passengers grew year over year. They grew by 30%. So it grew from 61,000 in 2023 to 79,933 in 2024, which is commendable. ET's traffic, total passenger uplift from these two New York airports, grew by 8% year over year, 157,000 in 2023 to 170,000 in 2024. That equates to an estimate 73% load factor on their New York flights last year. I expect this year to be a bit less because of what has happened with the US government visa policies. Now, remember I was talking about the point-to-point traffic of the KQ ticketed passengers being 48%. It has shocked me and it will shock you also, both Sean and John. The point-to-point traffic on Ethiopian's New York flights last year was only 4%.
I'm surprised it's 4%.
I would expect it to be in the 20% range, but I was shocked that it's only 4%. And so that means
I am not shocked at all, but if you look at the Washington O&D, you'll see a very different number there.
Yes, so I have that statistic with me also. In comparison, because Washington has a much, much bigger Ethiopian diaspora, it's the biggest in North America. and Toronto's catching up on that, by the way. Washington is 26% point to point. Obviously,
there you go.
Yes. So 96%. Basically, the New York market is nearly 100% focused on transit traffic via Addis Ababa. Their top market from New York, John, would you like to guess that?
I'm going to guess because it's not a guess really because I know this. It's going to be
Hmm.
Nigeria.
Yes, Lagos.
Yeah. But how much of that traffic is actually connecting over Addis versus how much of that traffic
I
is
have that.
connecting over Lome?
I have that. I'll just tell you. 1 second, please. We'll have the breakdown. Majority, what I checked was on the Newark flight. So that is via Lome. 1 second, I'll just tell
Well, see, that's the thing. During the course of this year, they've swapped because of the Newark runway works. They've had to swap JFK, Newark, JFK, like all over the place. So the consistency of which airport has been flying from where has gone out the window in 2025. I don't think on a given day you're just going to the New York area and you're pretty sure you're not going to land at LaGuardia, but anything else is in the air.
So Lagos to Newark, 24,000 passengers. Lagos to JFK, 14,000 passengers. So nearly double
Yep.
for Newark, which is obvious because it's much more convenient straight
No,
flight
but you
via
see,
Lome.
because of the way they're structured and because they've also got the code share with Air Cote d'Ivoire on that, they
Yes.
actually feed Lagos Abidjan JFK, they feed Lagos Newark, Lagos Lome Newark, and they feed Lagos Addis Newark non-stop, as well as Lagos Addis Lome Newark and JFK. So the actual routing between Lagos and the New York area on ET is a wide range of options out there. And you saw this. I messaged you this when I was coming out of Accra last week. We
With
had
the
a
80
big group
passengers,
on our flight who were flying
third group.
Accra, Addis, Lome, New York. So they're going all the way across Africa and coming all the way back to be 20 minutes away from Accra, but because it was a group, they were booked to fly that overnight and then come back there and then continue their flight the next afternoon from 20 minutes away because that's the way the spare capacity worked out best for a large group. And as I said, ET, because of their partnerships with ASky, because of their multiple hubs, their multiple hub waves and things like this, have the ability to offer these, I wouldn't say weird and wonderful, but a wide variety of connectivity specifically to the New York area and choice of airports, choice of routings, choice of connecting points, morning departures, evening departures. It's a non-contest, really. KQ is looking at a single small aircraft flying a single thin, long route, while ET has a network which is fed from a much larger network. And KQ has, again, we've heard this from KQ. KQ has survived on that route because of the SkyTeam partnership with Delta. If it was not for that, they would say that JFK route would probably have been dead by now, and maybe KQ would have been dead by now if that had not come to pass because there was a lot of risk they took on that. But it paid off for them in the end, and good for them. They leveraged their strengths in that respect. ET does not leverage their Star Alliance feed at Newark even half as much. ET, in fact, their feeder hub is the Chicago flights. And we got this from when we had a long chat with Mesfin at AviaDev on this, and I was on the bus with him heading to the gala dinner. And as he said, that New York flights are not about connectivity. Certainly there is connectivity by default at Newark, but for the most part, they push their connections over Chicago. The New York flights, the Atlanta flights, the Toronto, yes, because it feeds the rest of Canada, but New York and Atlanta and Washington are more about the O&D rather than it is about the connecting markets because those tend to go over Chicago primarily. And I just found that interesting over there because we were discussing whether Minneapolis would make sense and so forth. And his comment was that Minneapolis will actually eat into Chicago because so much of their traffic over Chicago is connecting onwards to Minneapolis. So it's an interesting dynamic, but I think you're right in terms of saying that ET is New York to Africa, while KQ is New York to Nairobi, and also some connections.
Yes, but also another reason why Newark and JFK can't cater to onward connections in one direction is because it arrives late night into both airports. So
Not
they can.
necessarily. Remember, they've also got the non-stop Newarks. They've got
No, I'm talking
Newark, which
about.
has both morning
So
and
that is,
evening.
but that is just now started, now. We're talking about last
Started
year's.
last December. Yeah, okay. It's not in the
Yeah,
2024 numbers, but even
yeah,
with that, it is catering primarily to the O&D. And it is there because the African markets, for the most part, did not otherwise have a connection into Newark. So, into
hmm,
New York, because the New York flights were all on the morning bank and which was not fed by all the African routes. So if you were going to
right.
New York, they were losing traffic to KQ and elsewhere because of the need to have that overnight stop in there. So the Newark came about as the second flight on the other bank because of the connectivity issues on the Africa end, because not all the markets that were feeding into that, certainly the big ones were, but say a market like Lagos, for example, Lagos to Newark required the overnight and consequently people were not flying ET. But now you have the ability to
Yeah,
do the direct flight to Newark on the night bank.
correct.
Are we nearly
With
there,
regard,
Behramjee? We go. You've still got some
yeah,
more golden
just
nuggets for us.
no, just finishing on this. So the Ethiopian top 10 markets, apart from Lagos being number one at 37,000, number two was Abidjan, which is obvious because of the Fifth Freedom flight between JFK and Abidjan, 23,000 passengers. Then Accra, 19,000. Accra also majority is via Lome. Then we have Lome at 14,000, again Fifth Freedom traffic between the two cities. Then we have Monrovia, 6,000, again all via Lome, connecting with ASky, and Conakry as well, all via Lome, 5,000 passengers connecting with ASky. So as you can see in this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of their top 10 routes on the New York City is fed via Lome. But now I would like to say one thing, and this is for the revenue management people at Ethiopian Airlines. This is a personal thing. I've been trying to fly in November, Douala, Washington, Douala, November 5th to December 4th. And obviously, I would like to fly via Lome because it's much, much shorter. The Ethiopian Airlines fares from West Africa via Lome are nearly $400 to $500 more versus flying via Addis Ababa. It makes the fare be very uncompetitive versus the other one-stop operators that are there via Europe. Obviously, against Royal Air Morocco, Royal Air Morocco is much, much cheaper, but then Royal Air Morocco has that inconvenience 12-hour transit on the way back. So I'm not comparing that. But the loads of Ethiopian Airlines currently in October and November on their US flights, especially via Lome, are very poor, especially on the Washington route. I see that through the Amadeus GDS. I know that by finding out the loads on particular flights through my friends at Washington Airport. I don't wish to tell you the exact numbers, but those numbers are very frightening. And I'm sure Ethiopian Airlines people know that for October, November. Please look at your revenue management pricing policy because your fares via Lome are not competitive at all. I sincerely hope that you look into that because in the low season, you need that cash flow to sustain your operations instead of flying flights which are less than 40% load factor, especially on the Washington Lome route. So that's my small rant.
Okay. Yeah, I think that is heard. Right. Thank you for doing that, Behramjee. And yeah, fascinating stuff, definitely. And I'm glad that we've waded our way through it. I learned quite a lot about some of these different markets and obviously the whole sort of positioning. Yep. And thank you, Sean, for doing your bit. So let's get into the last few. We still have a few more stories, but this is obviously part 2 now anyway. So the first one, let's go out of Africa, but with an airline that's very important to Africa, which is Turkish Airlines. They are the next on the list, an airline very close to my heart. Sean very kindly shared a picture saying it's 30 years since they started flying to Manchester Airport, which is when my dad was the station manager for Turkish Airlines when they actually launched back in 1995. I've got a nice picture of him doing that. They've also registered for the first time to be with us in Botswana next year for AviaDev, which is super cool. But the reason we're talking about them is that they had a mega order with Boeing. So it's 225 aircraft in total, but that includes options. And that's split between the 787-9, so the Dash 9, and the 737 MAX. So tell us a bit more about the ins and outs of the order and also what it means for Turkish specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, because, of course, they've got a lot of destinations already. What can we expect? Sean, you want to kick us off on this one?
Honestly, I don't really see this being a huge change in terms of their services to Africa. I think what we've seen and what we've discussed in the past when we did a deeper dive with James Pearson into the Turkish operations in Africa maybe a couple of years ago. Turkish's strategy into Africa has been driven by narrow bodies, by the new generation narrow bodies, or the Maxes or the Neos or whatever else. And I think we have seen from the way they have grown is that while certainly there are some routes which will get isolated wide bodies, primarily to target to the cargo demand, their preference has been to add a second flight on a MAX before they'll upgrade a flight to a wide body. And that is to improve their connectivity across different banks in Istanbul. And I give Accra as an example, where I think they're flying 12 times a week now. They've got a couple of A330s in there, and that's primarily, as I said, to cater to cargo. But there are days where they have morning and evening departures, and it's just the schedule is a split schedule, and that is to maximize connectivity from source market to different distribution markets without requiring a long layover in Istanbul to make them more competitive. But what was interesting, and I was looking at this not on a comprehensive level, but on a general level from in a few specific markets in Southern Africa, particularly, Turkish is still feeding primarily Africa to Europe traffic. Turkish has not pushed towards feeding traffic into India or the Far East or anything else. Certainly, they have a small share of that kind of traffic, but the bulk of their traffic is Africa to secondary points in Europe over Istanbul. And in that context, they are in a very different competitive environment than, say, an Ethiopian, which is east-west traffic mainly. Ethiopian, okay, may not be a good example, but say an Emirates, which is east-west traffic, or Qatar, which is east-west traffic, and so forth, versus these guys, which is very much a north-south traffic flow. The one insight that just came out of me from that is we said that people like Qatar has been unsuccessful in Namibia because Namibia is a north-south market, very unlike most of the other African markets, which tend to be east-west. Just looking at that, I think that with this order, I would not be surprised to see Turkish in Windhoek over the next while, because I think they're looking at where Windhoek's traffic goes, looking at the growth in Germany, and Turkish is obviously a huge presence in primary, secondary, and even some tertiary German markets. I think there is a competitive option that Turkish will be able to offer as they have smaller narrow bodies now coming into their fleet to supplement what they currently have operating over there. Yeah, and I'm actually flying on Turkish in a couple of weeks out of Joburg to Istanbul in a couple of weeks, and they swapped me from an A330 to an A350. I'm pleased with that.
Yeah, happy. No, I think that's a great shout. Yeah, the Germany-Turkey link and the Namibia link.
So
I think
as I
that's
said,
a great
the
shout.
only market I really see that might come out of this Turkish order as they have more wide bodies available, because obviously, like everybody, they want to have more wide bodies than they have. But I think Windhoek is one, because of this north-south flow that Turkish is primarily focused on. I think that is the one market we will likely see opening up in Africa sooner rather than later with a wide body, maybe as a result of this order.
And anything from you, Behramjee? You see any other opportunities or see anything different?
Oh, yes. I have one observation, please. I wrote about this on LinkedIn regarding the Turkish order recently for 75 787s and 175 or 150 737 Maxes. When it comes to Africa, there's one problem that Turkish Airlines has currently, and it has been sanctioned for in Nigeria in particular. I think maybe also in Accra a few times, is that baggage gets left behind a lot when they fly the 737 MAX 9 or the MAX 8 to Nigeria and Ghana, especially in the high season. And with the A321s also, the same problem exists. I feel that there are many routes in Africa which are currently being flown by the narrow body. Some routes are a mix of narrow body and wide body, which can easily sustain a daily 787-8. Now, the good thing about that is the 787-8 allows for the fact that there will be no baggage problems for passengers. Baggage will be easily fitted in the belly and they'll arrive there always. It also allows all destinations to be flown without any payload issues. You get the incremental cargo belly revenue, to supplement that flight. Plus, you get better premium class product on board with a flat bed, which the narrow bodies don't have. And for routes like Lagos, Abuja, Accra, in Central Africa, Douala, Yaoundé, etc., Nairobi, Addis Ababa, Dar es Salaam, I feel the 787-8 with the 220, 230 seats is ideal for those markets in the long term. But most importantly, they will not have the inconvenience of passengers not getting their baggage there, because this is a big problem with Turkish Airlines, and not only them, but even with Royal Air Maroc. Sean will remember that in Nigeria, they were suspended, or their license was revoked for a few days during one of the Christmas seasons a year or two ago, because it created a lot of rioting at Abuja airport in particular. I remember that story. And they were very heavily sanctioned by the NCAA on that. So I agree the 787-8 is not a very popular aircraft these days, but for each airline is specific and interesting in its own way. So the 788 for Turkish Airlines is quite an ideal aircraft, not only for Africa, but also for a lot of its tier 1 and tier 2 European routes, as well as a few GCC routes, which can easily do with the upgauge.
Great. Great. Watch this space. Let's see what they do. But yeah, thank you for that. Let's just do a quick Ethiopian briefing, because they have to mention them every month because they're always up to something. So there have been a few little changes to the schedules. I don't think it's been anything huge, but do you want to just summarize this, Sean?
Yeah, and I'm going to use our media partner Jim at AeroRoutes and his
Good
excellent
shout.
summaries on aeroroutes.com, which gives us all these changes in one place. So check it out if you get a chance. But yeah, there's nothing really exciting on Ethiopian. They've tweaked some schedules. For example, Athens is now becoming which was a split flight of Third Bank as well. It's now become all daytime bank 4 times a week rather than 6 times a week. They've made some changes in terms of Dhaka flights are not I think we'd mentioned that they were adding some terminators to Dhaka. Those are now out of there. They're now going to, it's all been tweaked on that response. Karachi, they plan to increase frequencies. They're not increasing now. Amman is increasing. Gatwick is switching from a 350 to a 787 over the winter. Newark, as we mentioned, the non-stop flights are coming back in December, which are being suspended from now till December. And one thing which Jim missed in it is that they are flying a Saturday-only seasonal non-stop flight from Addis to my home airport of Blantyre, so it goes Addis, Blantyre, Addis, rather than Addis, Blantyre, and then a stop in Beira in Mozambique on the way back. So if you want to fly out of Blantyre on a Saturday until the end of this month, you have a non-stop flight rather than having to make a stop via Beira. Unfortunately, I don't have any Saturday departures, otherwise I would have enjoyed that. But I think that summarizes it. There's nothing exciting, and I don't expect to see any huge announcements from ET over the winter season. Port Sudan also, which was my pick for route of the year last year, is now going up to double daily, which shows what a good choice it was even back then. And Sharjah, I think we mentioned this last month, is going up to daily, which is something that we had predicted. In fact, I said was going to happen by winter season. It sure enough is going to happen at the end of this month. Sharjah is going up to daily flights on a max. So yeah, I think that summarizes ET. Have I missed anything of particular consequence, Behramjee?
Abuja and Entebbe.
Abuja we covered last month, yeah. So 12 weekly, and again, that was something that we predicted. So Abuja, yes, 12 weekly is, they initially announced 10. Again, I said we were not going to be surprised it went up, and then sure enough, in fact, as we were going into our recording last time, they came out, they had loaded their 12th, which was, again, something that we covered before Jim covered, just to say, ha, Jim, you don't always get the scoop.
Yeah, but having said what you said, just to reiterate, brilliant, aeroroutes.com, get yourself on there, because all of the route analysis is the place to find
everything I missed.
Absolutely, it's a great resource.
AeroRoutes, it's actually the first website I check every day in the morning after I wake up, even before my email. To be very
if only we could all dream to be as cool as you, Behramjee. I'd absolutely dream.
It's a true story.
That's
So
good. It's lovely. It's lovely. I love that.
Honestly, if we had them properly categorized, and here's a tip for you, Jim. If you have them properly categorized by Africa region, I'd read your Africa page first thing. But the problem is you don't categorize by continent, and I could not care whether some domestic route in China is going up to 6 weekly or 7878 is becoming a 7879 on Tokyo to the Philippines. So sorry, but there's a lot of signal to noise ratio that makes it being my first step in the morning a bit much, too much data to have to digest at that early hour.
I don't know whether this says more about me or you, Sean, but I'm slightly disappointed by that comment. I thought that was exactly what you'd be up to. I thought you'd be loving hearing about a domestic change
if it's to do with Africa,
China.
yes. If it's to do with
Good
Africa,
man.
I'm the one pointing out that we have a non-stop flight on Saturdays only now.
Yeah, I love
So-
it.
I'm looking at Jim's front page right now. China Southern extends Guangzhou Darwin service in the northern summer 26. Much as I love the aviation industry, that is not my area of expertise.
But that matters hugely to the Shawn Mendis sat there in China. Your equivalent is absolutely buzzing off that news.
I completely agree. And you know what? Jim serves all of the markets, but if he categorized them by region a little more easily, that would be fine. So I've got bookmarks for his ET page, for his KQ page, for his SAA page, for various African country pages, but he doesn't have an overall Africa section, which might be something he wants to just add in for the future.
There we go. There we go. It's a tip. Right, we're coming towards the end, I do promise. So, quick one, Sean, your local airline, Malawi Airlines, is getting a new, in inverted commas, 737-700.
Yes, Malawi Airlines has taken delivery of a 737-700, which will be their second 737 in the fleet. It's an ex-Rwanda aircraft. I flew on it on Sunday, and fascinatingly, it already has a couple of armrests which have been damaged by passengers and stickers on some tray tables and all sorts of interesting stuff. But I'm not going to blame the airline for that. I'm going to blame the passengers and their thing, because I know when it got delivered, it was in pristine condition. It still has the old Rwanda blue leather seats. So it's actually a very comfortable. It's got the Recaro seats with the they're the slimline seats, so they've got a little bit of extra legroom. So even though the pitch is not really great, your legroom actually feels more. I enjoyed it. It was a short flight, but yes, that is now Malawi Airlines' second 737 to go in addition to the Dash 8. They're not adding any additional routes right now, but obviously routes like Lusaka, Harare, and Dar es Salaam, which ran only on the Dash 8 in recent times, are now going to be on 737 some days of the week. Significant increase in capacity, not necessarily an increase in routes. Malawi Airlines, for as long as this podcast, in fact, on our first podcast ever, we covered Malawi Airlines has planned an expansion, which we are still waiting for 2.5 years later. And I think we shall continue waiting because there's a very limited demand for routes other than the ones that they're already serving from Malawi. So that is Malawi Airlines' update.
Fair enough. And the next one is really just a bit of a shameless plug from my side, but just an update. And we're not going to go into detail about how this is going to be used, but it's just that TAAG took delivery of their second 787 this week. And I'm going to be interviewing the CCO on the podcast in a couple of weeks. So obviously subscribe to the podcast, then you'll be the first to hear it. And that will just be audio, I think. I don't think we'll be doing that as a video, but we'll ask him lots of questions about what does this mean? Fleet development, route development, are they on track? We've had our say on TAAG a little bit. I think what we'll do is get that episode out and reflect on it in the next episode is probably the best way to look at that.
One interesting thing to note about this new TAAG aircraft they've just taken delivery of is that this aircraft has actually come without a business class. And I know we've covered their 787 in the past where we mentioned that the 787s have a mix of configurations. This one was originally meant for TUI. So it's coming without a business class configuration, just with premium economy and economy, which is basically creating yet another variation in TAAG's fleet that makes it very difficult for consumers to plan a product with, as well as for TAAG to plan aircraft rotations with. So I'm going to sincerely hope they have some plans for how to deal with that. Otherwise, they're going to struggle to deliver the kind of product that they're going to need to deliver, especially when you're trying to compete in some of the markets they're competing with. Also, they have another 787 that supposedly has been ready for delivery, but has now been put back into storage. And there's a number of rumors floating around as to what this is happening about. My sources at Boeing tell me that it is linked to some sort of pre-delivery disputes between TAAG and Boeing that that hopefully will be resolved in the not too far future. But that aircraft has actually been ferried to Portland, Oregon, and has gone into storage there because Boeing no longer has space to store aircraft in at Everett while they await delivery, because they've had to move a lot of their completed airframes out of Charleston in hurricane season. A little bit of a little juggling act there for the third 787 for TAAG, which is ready to go but not ready to receive.
Yeah, a bit of warehousing going on over in Boeing, and hurricane season, all those other things. You want to mitigate any impact on that. Final story of this bumper episode, which is going to be in two parts, is back to Nigeria and cover another friend of AviaDev, an airline that attended the event this year, which is United Nigeria, who announced they're going to acquire 6X Southwest 737-800s with the option to buy a further 4. The question is, did they get a good deal, and what are they going to do with the aircraft? Behramjee, you want to start on this one and as our last story?
Sure. United Airlines Nigeria is a relatively new player in the market over there. They have some deep pockets. They're right now flying E45s, but the E45, it's a bit too small for a lot of.
Plus a bunch of wet leased aircraft. So they've also got wet leases and so forth. So it's not just they've got their own E45s, but they've wet leased a lot of other capacity. If you go to MM2 right now, you'll actually see that Airpeace and UNA are the two biggest players in terms of volumes.
What aircraft they're wet leasing though, Sean? So I don't know which.
320s, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, fine. So I think this, from a commercial standpoint, this was a good deal. They're getting aircraft which are being retired by Southwest Airlines. I doubt that they will be reconfiguring the aircraft into a dual-class cabin, because I don't think so they'll spend money on that. They'll just be keeping in the same 175-seater cabin configuration that the Southwest 737-800s have. The good thing is this aircraft is perfectly suited for the Golden Triangle domestic routes in Nigeria, Lagos, Port Harcourt, Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt. But it is a bit too big for majority of other domestic Nigeria routes. It is okay if they fly once a day from Lagos to Calabar, Kano, Enugu, Owerri, but not if they fly twice a day using that aircraft type. The aircraft is also ideally suited for majority of Nigeria to West Africa regional routes, because it's a baggage-heavy market, Lagos to Accra, Lagos to Dakar, Banjul, Freetown, etc. So the baggage will also help. Though yes, on Lagos, Accra, many people don't fly now with two-piece baggage. The majority fly with one piece. I knew Sean was about to say that because of his Africa World experience. But there are other routes which Nigerians do fly with a lot of two-piece baggage. Now, with regards to the regional routes with the 738, they will not be flown non-stop. There will be multiple stops en route. They'll be flying, I bet, via Accra to Monrovia or Freetown. They will not do Lagos, Freetown, Lagos for sure. Same thing for even Central Africa. I bet they will do something like Lagos, Cotonou, Libreville, or Lagos, Douala, Libreville. But overall, I think it is fine. Thank God they did not buy wide bodies at least. They took the smart approach by just looking at the narrow bodies. But this also opens up the opportunity, I feel, for something to be also bought that is smaller than the 737-800. Because there's a big gap between the E45 and the 738. It's a gap of nearly 130 seats. So if I was advising them, I would advise them to look at purchasing some used E90s, about 4 or 5 units from somewhere, and use them, because those E90s would be ideally suited for vast majority of domestic Nigeria routes, more than the 738. 738 is ideal for the Golden Triangle as well as maybe Kano, but not for majority of other routes. The E90's capacity, size and range is ideal for Nigeria domestic as well as some regional markets out of Lagos.
Right.
I am limited in terms of what I can say in this respect, because UNA is a client of mine, and I actually have advised them on what ideal fleet types are and costs and so forth for these markets. I think you're absolutely correct in terms that the primary market for these 737s is going to be in domestic, and that's going to bring their average seat costs down and make them competitive with a higher frequency schedule in the Lagos Abuja market primarily, but also on Harcourt, and with potential single or double daily frequencies into other markets like Asaba, Enugu, Calabar, Kano, etc., from both Lagos and Abuja potentially. So I think that is definitely there. I have my doubts as to, and I don't have doubts. I am convinced that a 737 is not an optimal aircraft to operate on regional routes. These markets from Nigeria are not large enough to support a 737 gauge on O&D traffic from either Lagos or Abuja. And you can do milk runs, but when you start doing milk runs, your engine cycles get really ridiculously bad. And on 737 NG, that is a deal breaker in terms of costs. Yeah. The 737-800 is the wrong aircraft to put on regional routes out of Nigeria. It is a nightmare to balance the costs on engine reserves. That's all I will say in that respect. But yes, I don't think we are done seeing what UNA has in terms of their fleet plans, at least judging by the advice that I've given them in the past.
Might be a silly question, Sean, but how does that differ from what ASCAI do with the same aircraft?
Because ASCAI is not operating these as point-to-point. ASCAI is running everything as a hub. Point-to-point from Lome is non-existent. So effectively, what ASCAI is doing is you've got all of West Africa to the rest of West Africa. And with that, you certainly can operate a 737-800 worth of traffic. But even ASCAI has grown these routes from where they started up mostly with a Dash 8, then went to a 737-700, then to an 800, and now to a MAX in many routes, where the capacity has incrementally grown over the course of 10 plus years. We're talking a very different thing in terms of we're going to open our regional routes with the 737 without any hub feed. Even though, yes, you're talking about a Nigeria market, which is infinitely larger than a Togo market, but the model is very different. And I think the danger which we have in a lot of these airlines is they look at ASCAI and say, look, ASCAI is flying this, why can't we do it? The answer is because ASCAI is a hub, and it's a hub which is being fed by Ethiopian, and it's a hub that, I mean, it is, you're not even talking chalk and cheese, you're talking cheese and lava.
But could UNA then partner with a big player that's coming into Lagos and say, we'll be your regional partner and you provide that inbound and outbound feed?
When you talk about partnering, nobody partners with Nigerian Airlines because there are serious concerns about Nigerian Airlines. They don't have the IT to be able to do interlining properly. They do not have IOSA certification to be able to join IATA clearinghouse and all these kind of things. There simply is not the level of standardization in the Nigerian market that you need to be a global player. The closest any of these airlines has come to achieving that kind of thing has been Air Peace, and we know what a basket case Air Peace is in terms of their IT, in terms of their planning and everything else to this point as well. So if Air Peace is the best of a bad bunch and Air Peace themselves are struggling to be able to do interlines and partnerships and so forth, I cannot imagine that a smaller player like UNA is going to be able to raise their game in the near future to be able to do that. And I say this with the utmost of love because I've got a lot of respect for UNA and the people behind it and what it is. But I've told their chairman this pretty much the exact words out there. If you're doing this, it is a journey. You're going to need to raise your game, achieve IALSA certification, invest in the proper IT, and then start looking in terms of partnerships. You're not going to have Emirates or Delta come and start delivering passengers to you on the doorstep until you've improved your reliability, safety, and everything else, which is what they rely on before they're going to start putting their passengers on you.
Yeah, great. And we really need a great, strong Nigerian airline in the region as well. So yeah, good on them. It's a starting point, and let's see where they go. Behramjee, final word to you.
Yes, with regards to United Nigeria, one thing I would like to add to what Sean is saying, having worked there for a few years, focus more on getting your IOSA certification fast. That should be your top priority. Do not join IATA clearinghouse. It will lead to a lot of headaches for you because cash management with Nigerian carriers is virtually non-existent. And joining IATA clearinghouse...
No, but Behramjee, your argument is completely structured the wrong way. You're saying don't do something good because you don't know what to do with it, not improve yourself to the point where you can make use of something good. And that's the kind of attitude why Nigerian aviation struggles to develop, why African aviation in general struggles to develop, because the people who rush into these kind of things are not prepared to deal with it and make a mess of it. And consequently, the people who should be raising their game to take advantage of these systems don't go into it looking at the failures of the others, but not realizing the fact that the failures of the others because the other people were stupid. And you might actually be a little smart. I don't think it's an issue that you shouldn't go into this because everybody else has failed to manage their cash flow. The solution is fix how you manage your damn cash flow.
Yes, but unfortunately, the mindset over there is completely different. So with IATA Clearinghouse, defaulting is virtually guaranteed to happen, unfortunately. I know it's not the
Behramjee,
right
I am
approach,
going
but
to completely disagree with you on this because I have managed airlines in IATA Clearinghouse. And if you put the right structures in place and you put the right things in place in Ghana, right next door to Nigeria, we never even forget defaulting out of it. We used to carry $500,000 balances in Clearinghouse every month simply because
yes,
it was easier to keep the cash sitting over there and to keep shipping it over to Ghana and shipping it back and shipping it everywhere else. So as far as that goes, if you know what you are doing, you can manage your clearinghouse very well, and it becomes a tool that guarantees your inbound interline revenue far better than manual cash processing and manual interline processing does, both from an efficiency standpoint, cash flow standpoint, and everything else. This is not rocket science. You just need to hire an honest person who knows what they are doing. And certainly that is not an easy thing to find, either competency or honesty, and especially a combination of both in Nigeria. But that
yes,
does not mean that a Nigerian airline in particular will never be able to make it work, because it can be made to work as it has been made to work in the rest of the world. And Nigeria is not anything unique in that negative sense.
yes, but unfortunately, the reality is different on the ground. That is what the main obstacle is.
Just because other airlines that you have worked for screwed up so badly does not mean that other airlines in the future are going to screw up as well, Behramjee. Remember, if you identify what went wrong and you fix that, the likelihood of that going wrong again is minimal, as long as you've
Uh-huh.
identified what the problem is and make it happen. I have optimism that Nigerian market will become a mainstream market eventually. I think there are structural issues over there, and those structural issues are slowly but steadily getting addressed. And yeah, some areas they do better than others. But in terms of when I look at the Nigerian market today versus even your days in Nigeria, which weren't that long ago. But if you look in terms of direct sales, e-commerce, OTAs, things like that, Nigeria is now the equivalent, if not the better, of many other far more developed markets in that respect. So Nigeria has raised its game in terms of direct distribution. Nigeria is still being held back by people like Nanta and the other stakeholders who have very loud voices, but actually very low value that they bring to the aviation ecosystem in terms of the travel agency lobbies and things like that. Nigeria struggles in terms of being such a large country where infrastructure, for the most part, is not developed to the highest standard in every pocket of the country that it needs to be. And again, that is due to political reasons. So a lot of structural issues in Nigeria, but IATA Clearinghouse is hardly going to be a problem, because when you're looking in terms of that, any airline who has achieved IOSA has the capability of managing cash flow in the clearinghouse. That is not even an airline specific. That is just basic hire a competent accountant who can manage that. I'm sorry, but I completely and totally disagree with you on this one.
I think it's a very good place to close it, because we started with Roger, who's a trained accountant, loves a balance sheet and a profit and loss account, and would always talk about cash flow. And we had
That's
a
lost and
lecture,
profit. He prefers the profit account.
of course, a lecture or a rant from Mr. Mendis to finish with, which couldn't be better. We started, I just had breakfast. We're finishing. I'm overdue for lunch. So this has been an absolute monster of an episode, but no, this is great. And thank you guys for all your efforts. And it was a real big episode.
Did we miss any?
2 parts. I hope we
No,
didn't miss anything. If we
no,
did,
no.
we're not doing it now. All right. This is next one. Somebody's got to edit this thing. So that's me, right? So thank you, everybody out there, for listening. As we always say every month, help us spread the word. We know we've got a loyal fan base here, but spread this, share it with somebody you think
Like and
is going to
subscribe.
enjoy it. Yeah, it's on YouTube. It's on all the podcast platforms. You don't have to sign up for or pay anything at all, and connect with us too. We're very active on LinkedIn especially, but also some of the other platforms too. So if you can find them, then you know where to go. And we'll be back for the next episode in a few weeks' time. But until then, we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.